Good afternoon, friends. Today we have a very unusual speaker for our three-session speaker series, and today we have a person who is a sort of all-in-one and has been pursuing his passion for railways. So, Mr. Raghunandan is a retired IS officer, and he took an early retirement about 10 years ago, and now we know the reason why, because he is an avid collector of all things railways. He is also the restorer of vintage cars. In fact, to some of you, I have sent his profile, and you will see that he had restored three car photographs in that. Now, because of his background of being an IS officer, he also has been an activist for good governance and various other things which will make all our lives easier. So it is, I am really privileged to have Mr. Raghunandan here today with us, and really thankful to Mr. Naresh Narasimhan of Venkatraman and Associates to having me introduced to Mr. Raghunandan. So with this brief intro, Mr. Raghunandan, over to you. We will follow up with a session, and which is mostly one-sided, so that we have a session of whatever length Mr. Raghunandan says, and after that we'll follow it up with a question and answer session. Over to you, Mr. Raghunandan.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to all of you. Thank you, Naresh, for connecting me to Sunil. A few days back, through Naresh, we were able to have an interesting conversation, and I was quite surprised and humbled when Suresh invited me. I'm a rank amateur into a meeting where people have very daunting professional qualifications in things about which I have nothing more than an amateur interest. But I'm always willing to talk to a captive audience. I can be a very boring person when it comes to heritage. And like Sunil said, yes, it has been a passion, and I really enjoy working on it. By education, I'm not an engineer. I'm not an architect. I'm a lawyer and a biologist. So everything that I know on engineering has been picked up through my hobbies and other interests, not through any professional work. And in a sense, I'm quite glad for that, because I think professional engagement sometimes takes away the fun of being involved in something because you're just purely passionate. What I'd like to do is that I have a presentation which is kind of a freewheeling conversation, but it has some, shall I say, pointers as to how I approach restoration, which might be useful. So let me just share the screen. I'm sharing the screen from my computer. So if I'm permitted, that will be great. I wonder if everybody can. I don't think
yes,
my
yes, sir. Yeah, we can see your screen. Yes, we can.
Okay.
See. Yes.
Yeah. So this, you can all see my presentation, and you can hear me.
Yes, we can see.
We can see. This is a kind of a freewheeling presentation. This is a presentation that I repeat a lot. I've done this for heritage officers of the railways. I've done it in other contexts. It's mostly about mechanical restoration, but I think there are certain pointers here which are useful if you look at conservation of buildings and other artifacts here. I think there are some bona fide reasons to demolish and rebuild. India is great for demolishing and rebuilding. This is something I have noticed with despair in the government. At various times in the government, I've been in jobs where I could have prevented demolition and rebuilding, but it's happened right there in front of my eyes because people love to demolish and rebuild. I remember I used to be the Deputy Secretary Protocol. I was the Chief Protocol Officer of the state when at a very young age. I was hardly 29, 30 years old then. And in Mysore, there is the Mysore House. It was built in 1803, just after the Third War of Mysore, when they established a residency in Mysore. And for 80 years, Mysore was ruled through what is known as a commissionerate. So the residency in Mysore was built in 1803, and it was one of the first buildings in India, at least, to be electrified, because Mysore state got electricity in 1902. So it had beautiful wooden fans, and it had wonderful old rheostats for voltage regulation. It had enamel bathtubs. It had absolutely fabulous Shanks and Royal Doulton wash basins and toilet fittings. And we had president's rule then, and a governor took it upon himself to flatter the then prime minister who was supposed to visit. So a budget of 18 lakhs was sanctioned, and immediately the first thing that it was throw out all the heritage fittings there, and it was absolutely heartrending to see them all thrown out and taken away and broken up. And I couldn't pick it all up because there's no protocol for a third person to pick it up, so it was all gone for scrap. And to crown the insult, the then prime minister cancelled his trip to Mysore and did not come, so the 18 lakhs was also wasted. But even so, even as I recall these stories, I can say that there are sometimes valid reasons for demolishing and rebuilding something. And the most important one is, of course, that a structure has become unsafe. But of course, what is unsafe, who certifies something as unsafe, all these are issues that we need to consider. But yes, an unsafe structure may need to be demolished. Structure may have lost its utility value. It may have come in the way of something. It may be obstructing something else, and therefore it is necessary to demolish a structure. A structure is incapable of being repurposed. Repurposing of buildings is a very, very important way of preserving heritage. Anybody who has been to London will know that the London docks to the east of the London Bridge, it was pretty much of a mess. I mean, they were all full of decaying structures, and they've all been repurposed into office blocks and so on. And the railway line runs through the buildings. They built a metro. It is not part of the London Tube, but it is a private railway line which goes all the way down to Greenwich. And this line actually runs through the buildings. It's very interesting. It actually punches holes through the buildings and it runs above the ground. It's a fascinating, shall I say, way in which they have repurposed the buildings. And this has become a hip and trendy place. And of course, sometimes what happens is that the benefits of demolishing something, even if you like something, we believe that it needs to be demolished because the benefits far outweigh the costs which will be incurred in preserving something. So these are some of the bona fide reasons to demolish and rebuild. But there are some systemic disincentives against preservation of heritage structures. And this is something that is wrong with our system. Our system has rules and laws which are very, very unmindful of heritage, completely unmindful of heritage, and it just doesn't protect heritage. For example, we have an insane system which says that the older the building, the less is its maintenance budget, because maintenance budget is calculated by on the basis of the value of the building, and if the value of the building has come down to zero, then they have very little money to spend. So what happens is that buildings continue to tailspin into disrepair, and then it reaches an unsafe stage where banyan trees are growing out of the trees, the roof is leaking, and then they say let's demolish it. So low maintenance budgets are a very important factor. This is something that is completely wrong in the PWD system. We lack requisite skill sets in older methods of construction. Nobody knows how to build an arch. Nobody knows how to do lime mortar. Nobody knows how to do lime mortar flooring. Nobody knows how to repair old electrical fittings. And so the easiest thing is they say it's cheaper to replace all this. I remember there were brass lights and brass switches in the old government house and even in the Karnataka High Court. And they were removed and cheap plastic fittings were fitted because that was the easiest way of doing it. Then we have this whole caste system of construction. I think there's a most tyrannical nomenclature is kacha and paka. People say ye kacha structure, ye paka structure. My ancestral home is a kacha structure. It is 140 years old. It stands in monsoon Kerala and it's perfectly fine. It doesn't have a single crack. It has a 2 feet thick wall at the bottom, which tapers down to 14 inches at the top. It's a double-storied construction. The woodwork is done in an amazing way through what is known as Tachu Shastram. Tachu Shastram is a Kerala system of carpentry, which is actually communicated from one generation to other in code language. I have sat down and actually repaired a part of that with the descendants of the same carpenters who built the building for my great-grandfather. And I've been able to document some of the joinery, and I can tell you cannot even insert a tiny little blade into some of those joints. When we removed a part of the roof that is fitted without any nails, I discovered 140-year-old neem leaves kept underneath to prevent termites from attacking the wooden superstructure. So you can just imagine the kind of technology that was there. We don't have those kind of skills. And so this whole thing about kacha is kacha and pakka is pakka. Perish the thought. My own house that I live in here has been built for less than 3 lakh rupees. It's built out of mud with mud blocks. And as long as you protect it from the rain, it's perfectly fine. There's no plastering. And I live in a house that is built even in those days at about 30% of the cost of a conventional person. I think a very important aspect is that there is a very low emphasis in engineering sciences devoted to aesthetics. And I think our engineers, I mean, forgive me, there are a lot of you who might be engineers, but our engineers are generally substandard. I will believe that India has good engineering skills when I can see a manhole that is level with the top of the road. As long as manholes stick up 6 inches above the road, I don't think our engineers are great. And if you look at our engineering design, it's largely terrible. If you look at the way that, if you look at, for example, Italian cars or German vehicles and the kind of detail that goes into designing something that is industrial, we do not have those kind of skills. There are vehicles in India that are a complete disaster, but I will not go into that. Overall, I would say that the CAT kind of system in which you pass an objective type exam and you can solve some abstract mathematical problems doesn't actually equip you for engineering. For engineering, you need to have good hand-eye coordination. I know engineers who cannot change a spare tire. I know engineers who cannot draw a circle. I don't know why drawing skills are not important. The three-dimensional intelligence is not important for engineering entrance exams. And that's the reason why 50% of our IIT graduates go and become finance consultants, because they were not cut out for engineering in any way. They just came to IIT because it's prestigious to be in IIT, and then you can get admission to a foreign university and do something entirely different. So I don't think we devote enough in our engineering education to aesthetics. There are also a lot of malified reasons to demolish and rebuild. One is that construction procurement offers greater scope for corruption. I work on anti-corruption a great deal. That's one of my consultancy areas. And I collaborated once with the UN ODC, UN Office on Drugs and Crime. There's a report in the public domain on corruption in procurement. And this reveals that procurement corruption in India could be as high as 20% to 30%. Modern construction methods are more amenable to leakage through corruption. You can always compromise on the cement quality, on the steel quality, and the building will still stand. It will not be there for 100 years, but it will stand for 40 years. And by then, everybody would have died and gone away. So there was no problem. So corruption procurement is easier to manage when you are not doing a heritage structure, but when you are building an entirely new structure. The other big tyranny is that finance department gives you a budget. So why allow the budget to lapse? So you will have in Covent Park unnecessary stainless steel barriers because there's a budget. They will plant trees under the shade of other trees because there is a budget. And so you keep doing over decorating and over investing in structures that need to be left well enough alone. I mean, stone walls are painted over with enamel paint. Granite facing is done for flooring. Perfectly fine terracotta flooring, which can last for 100 years and has lasted, can last for another 100 years, is pulled out and granite flooring is done. All this is because budget lapse nahi hona chahiye. Paisa to mil gaya hai to kharch karo. Then new construction offers greater turnover of projects. I mean, you never hear of a conservation architect making money. An architect has to build something new. So building something new, getting a construction team, building 24/7, instead of sitting with a little paintbrush and cleaning a tile painstakingly, the money that you earn is much more than when you construct rather than when you restore. So people who come into restoration are few and far between, and often they are told that they have not made the right career choices. This is a shot, probably 100 years old, taken in the 1920s of Bangalore railway station. I'll show you photographs of Bangalore railway station. This is what is now platform number 8 and 9. In the far distance, you can see gabled roof. And this is very interesting because it's a series of gabled roofs that face towards the train. There is no slope of the roof towards the train. but it's a series of zigzag gables that are arranged perpendicular to the direction in which the train is moving or the train is aligned. And the reason for this is that the rain therefore collects and it does not pour onto the train. If you had a sloping roof that slopes towards the train, you will find that water will flow on top of the train and people will not be able to enter. So even today, if you go there, you will find that the roofing is done in such a way that the water drains out from the center of the gutter rather than towards the end of the gutter. And by and large, this entire structure that you see in the far distance is exactly the same as it is today. Restoration and conservation, and that's where I'll come to it. Restoration is to put something back into its original state. So if something has been modified, something has been changed, the idea is to put it back into its original state. Conservation is to protect, preserve, and maintain. So conservation follows upon restoration. If something has not been conserved already, then you first need to restore it and then you need to conserve it. But before you want to restore it, you must understand what was its original state. And that is why 50% of your effort in restoration goes into research. It is not into the actual process of restoration, but research is very, very important. I will illustrate this with a few examples. Now, it is not about making something beautiful. This is the biggest misunderstanding about restoration. People think that restoration means making something beautiful. No, 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 it's not. Because beauty itself is a highly subjective sentiment. Symmetry could be beautiful, proportionate could be beautiful, harmony could be beautiful, functionality could be beautiful. So, but these things don't go hand in hand. For example, anybody who sees a Volkswagen car or a Citroen 2CV car will notice that it's ugly, but it's extremely functional. A Jeep is functional, and there's beauty in that. But also, if you look at a Picasso painting, I mean, asymmetric, disproportionate, contrasting, extravagant, all of this can also be beautiful. So a 1959 Chevrolet Impala car would be beautiful because of its garish fins and, very much like a Shami Kapoor, Helen and Pran movie. Whereas a Citroen 2CV would also be beautiful because it is exactly the opposite. It has absolutely no frills, extremely functional, built for French farmers, and then became a cult car. So the question is, if we start saying that we want to make something beautiful and that is restoration, then what happens is that we will get caught up in this endless argument as to what is beautiful. What I think is beautiful is not what you think is beautiful. So there could be arguments, and then we might end up only using a subjective interpretation of what is beautiful. So therefore, restoration, the most important thing about restoration, and let me come to that here, are about what I call the 10 commandments of restoration. And the first one is that thou shalt not over restore. Thou shalt not try to make something beautiful. Do not over restore. That's the most important thing. This is Bangalore railway station, platform number 8, the same building that I showed you. And if you notice here, the roof has been converted to metal sheeting, ugly metal sheeting, about 8 to 10 years back, or even later than that. For more than 120 years, it was a beautiful double tiled roof. And that tile roof was not leaking. It was perfectly fine. There was absolutely no need to change it. Some whimsical officer came and said, oh no, let's change it. We got to put tin sheets. Why? It might be any one of the reasons that I quoted, the bona fide reason or the mala fide reason. More often the mala fide reason. Budget hai, to kar lo. We have the budget, let's do it. So tiles were pulled out, absolutely unnecessary. And the roof was converted to the sheeting. And you can guarantee that in the next 10 years, the sheeting will be changed. So this gives an opportunity for continuous procurement and unnecessary procurement. We did not need to do it. The roof was strong enough to bear the weight of double tiles, and yet we went and changed it. And I must also tell you, unfortunately, I don't have pictures here, but the crest of the gable had very important, very beautiful crested tiles, not the simple, ordinary, U-shaped or L-shaped tiles that we normally get at the moment, but it had a crest with a design on it, and that's gone. It's completely gone. You will not get those tiles today for love or for money, but this is what was done at that point in time, and this is how it happens. Whimsy rules, whimsical approaches adopted. Now, if you get an unrestored original object, please conserve it. If you do not know how to restore it, then please conserve it. Just let me just give you an example. Just hold on for a minute. You can see my picture, right? You can see my face, right?
Yes, we can.
Can you see my face? Okay, right.
Yes,
Just a minute. Just. Yeah, if you look at it, this is a guard's lamp from the railways. But this is a very interesting guard's lamp because it is actually made in England and it was used by the BBNCI, the Bombay, Baroda and Central Indian Railway. It has a marking over here, BBNCI. You can see the marking over here. I have not restored it. I don't need to restore it. I am not going to restore it because I am going to keep it as it is. Clean it, use it. It's a perfectly usable guards van. It has still got the original paint under this, and I'm not going to restore it. I'm going to keep it as it is. So today, what is known as patina. Patina is very, very important. Let me give you an example of a car that is maintained in the Lyon in Paris in the museum. It's a Mercedes 600, huge car which was used by Hitler. Now it had bulletproof glasses and all that. It is damaged. It is damaged because it was taken as prize of war, and at that time people were so angry that they broke the glasses and so on and so forth. That car is not going to be restored. It's going to be kept as it is because forms a significant part of history, and its breaking also was a significant historical event. So the car is maintained as it is with its damaged exterior, which was damaged just after the Second World War. So the original state of something is the purest form of anything, because that is what its makers intended to be. We have a responsibility to our future generation is to preserve something in its accurate state so that children in the future can make out that this is what it looks like. You do not have the right to change that. But if you go to Mysore, for instance, the Mysore Museum, a lot of money has been spent in Mysore Museum. Again, a budget was available. It was restored. The locomotives have been restored. All the colors of the locomotives in the Mysore Museum are wrong. There's a YP meter gauge locomotive which is painted in German colors. It's painted with red wheels and garish colors. And we made a mistake because our children will think that that is what Indian locomotives look like. They didn't. They were black or unpainted. The wheels were always unpainted because you cannot paint moving parts. You have to keep it as in bare metal and you must preserve it by putting a little bit of grease or oil on top of it to protect it. But you cannot go ahead and paint it. But that's what was done. Now, this is the Express. This is India's oldest locomotive. This is what it looked like. This is what it looked like. It was in Jamalpur for many years. Then it was shifted to the Calcutta Railway Museum. And finally, it went to the Perambur Museum where they decided to make it run. And this is what it looks like now. It's ridiculous. This is what it is painted like today. The Fairy Queen, exactly the same thing happened to the Fairy Queen. And I was involved in helping the railways to research what it looked like, because as a student at the age of 17, I used to bunk college in Delhi and go away to the National Rail Museum where these locomotives were just being put into the museum. The museum was opened, I think, in 73 or 74, and these locomotives are put there. So I have photographs from those days which showed what the original livery of the locomotive was. And I had to research it, and I gave a document to the railways, and they luckily for me, they adopted at least about 80% of what I recommended. There were some things that were left, still garish, but still that was a pretty good success. But look at if you compare this picture with what the locomotive was and this picture, you just look at what we have done in the name of restoration. This is not restoration. Now you can put period optional accessories. For example, if I were to restore the kind of the same bathroom fittings, but I can today source, I know the source from where I can get modern brass switches, which are manufactured exactly to the standards and to the look of the switches those days, and I can fit them. I know the sources from where you can obtain. Sometimes what happens is you're caught up in a dilemma as to what you should do. And a very important debate recently which happened was when a car that belonged to the Nizam of Hyderabad was restored. And the car was actually a 1909 or 1910 Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. Absolutely beautiful, very upright, formal car. But in the 1930s or 40s, it was actually uh, refurbished for the Silver Jubilee of the Nizam. And it was done by the railway workshop in Hyderabad, and they did a shoddy job. They put some very ugly mudguards from a modern car onto the Rolls Royce. So the debate was whether the car should be preserved in its later avatar, because that also was a significant event, which is the Silver Jubilee of the Nizam. But ultimately, it was decided that it would be restored back to its original state. So it was restored finally to its original state. And the same thing at the last 2 points that I mentioned are the same with respect to the Hitler car, because it was preserved in this later stage after it was damaged, because that was a significant historical event in the life of the car, and therefore it was decided to be preserved in that state. So as I said, research is half the restoration, and the restorer must have thorough knowledge before commencement of restoration, and any incorrectly done restoration is of no value. And this is something that we guys in the vintage car movement, we hotly debate it, we fight about it, and so on and so forth. And currently I'm doing up a car which I've owned for 20 years. It has royal provenance. It has taken me 20 years to get to the bottom of some of the research, to get it. I've had to travel to the UK. I have to travel to Germany to get details. I've got the original building records of it. I know the date on which it came to India. I know through whose hands it has passed, but there are still gaps in my knowledge. There is a 10-year gap between 1962 and 1972, where I don't know where the car was. So there are many things that you do. It's a fascinating thing. Not everybody can do it, but this is something that we must keep in mind. So that's the second commandment. You should not start restoration unless everything is properly seen. The third thing is, and this is very important for mechanical restoration, I am sure this is important for civil restoration also, do not dismantle anything unless it is absolutely necessary. I mean, we people, when we do our cars and all that, we try to keep things integrate. I mean, with integrity is maintained. And if you are dismantling something, then you must use the correct tools and materials. You should not try and burn off something. You should not try to yank off something. And the dismantling process must be meticulously documented. Because the worst thing that you can do is you can remove something and put it all into a box. You will not remember what goes into the box the next day. And then when you put it back together, you find a few screws and nuts and bolts in the box, and you don't know from where they came. And that's the worst thing to happen. So dismantling something is to be rarely done. And if it has to be done, it has to be done with proper documentation. Everything has been taken out. These days, I even take videos and I talk as I am dismantling something. And I can tell you, one forgets. The visual memory is very fickle. One forgets what happens. And so everything it's important that you document. And this is something that you must do when you are taking off, special fittings or decorative fittings that are put into a building, things like brackets and so on and so forth, because you will end up not knowing from where they came from. Other very important thing is always you must use the original fastening methods, and this is very important for mechanical restoration. You look at locomotives, for instance. Locomotives in the initial period was almost entirely riveted. Even the water tanks were riveted. First of all, riveting skills are extremely difficult to get these days, but you must do that. So you have all these 7 or 8 ways in which two things are joined together, particularly metal. It's nailing, riveting, using screws, nuts and bolts, soldering, brazing, and welding. Welding is the most recent. Nuts and bolts itself is a fascinating thing, because there are British thread nuts and bolts. There are, British spanners won't fit on metric nuts and bolts. I have a car which is very interesting because it's a British car. My MG is a British car, but this British car was assembled using equipment that the factory bought from Germany after the First World War. So what they have done is they have converted the heads of the bolts to British specification, but the thread is German specification. And I had to source these nuts and bolts specially in order to ensure that the threaded holes in my locomotive were not stripped when I put a British nut and bolt into it. These are things that when you get into it, you get into real detail, and unless you understand these things and unless you are patient, you might do some great harm to what to a particular artifact that you are restoring. Now, this I'm coming back to look at fasteners. If you look at the roofing in the Bangalore station, you will find some very interesting metal cast items into which the wood is inserted, and this is still standing, and this is completely done with wood. So the wood is not joined to wood, but the wood is fitted within a metal bracing and then fitted up. And this roof is so strong, it was taking a double tiled, an inner tile and an outer tile roof, and now we have replaced it with sheets. Frankly, the whole thing looks so ugly, but what to do? I mean, this is something that the railways did in a moment of madness, but they do more things like this all the time. So this is what one has to worry about. Then please do not undertake freestyle decoration. If only one item remains, it is best restored in the livery that it first bore. I mean, you look at the Express. The Express is the classic example which I gave you. What is the necessity to undertake freestyle decoration? This happens in the National Rail Museum every 5 years. Luckily, now the National Rail Museum is much more well researched. But when the National Rail Museum was first set up, it was set up with the help of a British enthusiast called Mr. Michael Sato. He used to live in Calcutta, and this gentleman produced a document which is available in the National Rail Museum. I found it. A good director of the National Rail Museum allowed me to search, and we found it. And I've taken a copy of it. This was like a workshop manual. It was like a manual of instructions for every director who came. But there are people who have spent a lot of money. They're painting the locomotives with Rajasthani filigree. They've got people to paint it in Rajasthani filigree. They've got all kinds of colors put on the locomotive. And then the locomotive sits out in the open and then it rusts. The other big mistake that we do is we put a signage on the locomotive itself. For example, you look at the locomotive Express. It says Loco Works Perambur. I mean, Express was running in the East Indian Railway. Perambur had nothing to do with it except the last bit of getting it restored. But they've labeled it as their own. So you'll see this happening in the Mysore Museum. They'll nail on to a locomotive what the locomotive is. India is otherwise terrible on signage. But when it comes to museums, we put signage, we hammer like nailing Christ to a cross, we hammer the signage onto the artifact. Why? There's no necessity. You can put the signage separately, but we don't do that. So this is another common mistake. Then you should not gloss over the details. If you are making mistakes, please correct the mistakes then. Number of the rivets, the correct material, positioning of builder plates, right instrumentation, not a single locomotive. There is a book written recently by a friend of mine which documents 400 locomotives which are plinths. I can guarantee you that not a single one of these 400 locomotives that are kept out in various places, including the 6 locomotives in Bangalore, have the right instrumentation. They've all been removed or some hand-painted rubbish has been put on and so on and so forth. Fastenings, handles, grills, fittings, glass holders, toilet fittings. I mean, people think I'm crazy, but I've got wash basins and things like that, which I picked up, and they say, why are you doing this? I say, because you'll not get these wash basins later. I've fitted them at home. And people think I'm crazy. But the fact of the matter is that you're not going to get these Royal Doulton or Shanks, wash basins in future. Or if you have to get them, you'll have to import them from the UK at huge cost at this point. They still make them in the same designs. So why not keep them? Why break them? And then we say, no, we'll put some new thing. And we put the new thing and in 20 years, it's gone. So these are some of the things that we just don't take care about in the beginning. Like this. If you say, look at this. I was talking about maintenance. Now, these brackets are originally there. They are there for more than 100 130 years or whatever in the Bangalore City railway station, platform number 8. Can't somebody climb up there and tighten up the nuts? You spend crores of rupees whitewashing the thing, putting signage and that and this. What does it take to just get up there and routinely maintain this, clean it up properly? You don't do it. You just absolutely don't do it. This is again another detail that you will find in the Bangalore railway station. Again, here you will see that some bits have been broken. some some copings and stuff have been removed. Plastic drain pipes have been put. These are all old cast iron drain pipes. They could have been replaced with cast iron drain pipes, and you can again see the metal roof there, which is now being put. Then this is again something very important for mechanical restoration. Always maintain the correct tolerances, particularly on moving parts. Use the correct lubricants. Always test mechanical parts before final fitting. This is very important. Sometimes you just do need to replace things. I mean, on my MG car, I had a chronic problem with the carburetors, and this is a double carburetor sports car. So finally, what I did was I just grit my teeth and bought the new carburetors. Luckily, the UK is a repository for old parts, and they're manufacturing some of the new parts, some of the old parts using new metal. At the end of the day, aluminum, 80-year-old aluminum has got a fatigue point, and there's ovality in the openings. The needles don't sit properly. The jets don't function. So ultimately, I grit my teeth and I bought carburetors, and the car runs perfectly well. So one needs to replace things, but the mechanical parts have to be replaced. And in fact, today it's much easier to do so because of 3D printing, because of all kinds of CAD systems that are available. You can remanufacture parts even in India, and you can get parts of a very high quality. And one should record every process of restoration, because this is a guide for future, particularly in the railways where institutional memory is very important. The railways doesn't have an institutional memory. I have in my collection electronic copies of more than 130 Indian locomotive blueprints. I spent a lot of money, a lot of my time traveling. I don't travel abroad to look at the sites. I go to archives and museums and hang around there for days. But I have got them from the UK. And the tragedy is that the RDSO in Lucknow doesn't have a single drawing. And the RDSO from 1928 has been the institution to design locomotives for India. And these designs were put out for international tender, and manufacturers across the world used to pick up those designs and build locomotives to our specifications. I get those drawings from the archives of the manufacturers, which have survived 2 world wars, and they are there. But you cannot find them in India. Why? Because somebody made a rule saying that after 30 years, they've all got to be destroyed. So they've destroyed all their drawings. India had 10,000 steam locomotives. In 2000, we still had locomotives. Today, we have 600. And can you find even a handful of people who can restore them? No. It's very sad, but a few months back, I attended an international conference where a 22-year-old chap, 22-year-old American was advising us on how to restore our Indian locomotives, steam locomotives. So we do not have drawings. We do not have details. We are great. We think that we are the brightest people in the world and we can remember everything. We cannot. Please document. Please be like the Germans. There's no oral tradition with the Germans. The Germans restore and keep documentation for everything. I have got a German workshop manual for my car because my car is a BMW. And I use Google Translate to read through it, and the specifications are perfect. I could restore that engine myself. And one should always properly maintain a restored item. This is a big tragedy. If you go to the National Rail Museum, 30 crores were spent in refurbishing the National Rail Museum a few years back. But still, many of the locomotives are lying outside in the rain. I mean, it's a disaster because if rainwater seeps in between the cladding plates and the boiler, it will rust from within. It will rust from inside. You will not even know about it. So there must be a maintenance schedule which has to be prepared and strictly adhered to. And we must avoid repeated restoration. Repeated restorations put stress on the structure, on the artifact. On the artifact, a lot of stress is put if you keep on restoring it again. Because every time you restore it, you are scraping away something. You are exposing something to potential damage. And that is something that you should avoid, because once you restore it, then you must maintain it all the time. And one should have fun. I think you should have passion about it. Restorations is all about passion. It's about Zen. It's deeply relaxing. It's intensely philosophical. So you find solace in research, discovering quirkiness, coincidence. It can give you a quiet laugh. Sometimes there are things that you notice. I'll tell you a very interesting thing. I was looking at a model, one of the most beautiful models of a railway artifact. It's a model of a B&R dining carriage, and it is in the National Rail Museum. And I was documenting it properly, and I said that this is so beautiful. I mean, it's 1:12 scale, so it has an almirah. It has a kind of a dinner wagon inside the dining car, which is about 6 inches tall. And inside the dinner wagon, the doors can be open, and inside that there are bottles with labels that can almost be read. So I said, there's an artist who's made this, and this artist must have definitely signed or left his or her mark on it somewhere, And something, I discovered that it was made on 28th of January or 27th of January 1928. And would you believe it? I discovered it on 27th of January 2008. I was sitting in that room on 27 January 2008. It was a Sunday, and I was actually looking at the locomotive, and somewhere underneath something, I noticed a little bit of this writing. And when I scraped off the over grime, I saw it is 27. So exactly on the same day, I discovered the date of manufacture of that thing. So this is something that you cannot share. You can only laugh about it and marvel at the coincidence of it. Now, this is a picture. It's a story behind this picture. This is in London. This is St. Pancras railway station. St. Pancras railway station was one of the old Victorian railway stations, and it was one of the biggest stations in London. It was a pride of the Victorian era. And in the 70s or 60s, it was slated to be demolished. And there was a very famous film actress. Her name was Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr was something of a sultry siren, film actress, but she was an extremely brainy lady. She was a mathematician, and she was a legend. She worked with the British intelligence during the war, deciphering secret codes, and she never spoke about it. So Hedy Lamarr later on became an avid heritage fan, and because of her effort, this station was saved. And this station was subsequently used as the London terminus of the Eurotunnel, of the Channel Tunnel. I mean, of crossing the channel. Now, it's a huge station with a completely covered area. And if you are at this level, which is the ground level, you cannot notice that there is an intermediate level that has been built inside the Victorian era building, which is completely modern. You go up an escalator and suddenly you are in a different world. You could be in a place as slick as Bangalore Airport, let us see. So can you imagine an area like Bangalore Airport or Delhi Airport captured within the precincts of a Victorian station? They did not demolish anything in the Victorian station. They built a station within a station. And when you climb to that level, from there, you can catch the Euro train, which is an absolutely modern train. And what they did when they restored it is they put up this huge sculpture. And this sculpture captures the entire romance of travel, in my opinion. It's a huge sculpture of a couple embracing. And that is what stations are to most of us. A station is a place where my girlfriend came along with my mother in 1982 to see me off when I was on my first job. And I think it's that day on which my mother probably guessed that I was in love. And this story had a happy ending, like any Indian story. I did marry that girl, right? That is what it means to me. That is what New Delhi station means to me. Stations are about meetings and partings, and it is about emotions, about anticipation. It's not just a place where people are moved. This is not a chicken factory. This is not a poultry farm. This is a place where people come and there are emotions tied with buildings. And it is that we ask you to preserve. You may want to demolish. Certainly there are imperatives. I mean, the world is getting to be increasingly bigger place. There are new technologies. These are all things in which you are experts. You're all experts in this. You know how to move people, streamline. And moreover, a new set of youngsters will develop their own emotions over the buildings that you construct. But preserve a little bit of the past for us also. And it's for them also. Because they will also understand the continuity of the emotion of a railway station. And I think that is something that you need to keep in your mind when you go ahead and try to refurbish or improve railway station. It's a very simple thing to demolish and build. But something is lost when you demolish and build. And I think a country that does not preserve its past really has no future. That's the way I look at it. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Raghunandan. If all of you could please unmute yourself and give a round of clap to Mr. Raghunandan for that. Such a wonderful talk that he gave to all of us, taking out time this afternoon. So it is obvious that it is said, T.S. Eliot said that it is obvious that we no more can explain passion to a person who has never experienced it. Then we can explain light to a blind. But today, Mr. Raghunandan has, shown what a passion personified it, and he left us with some very, very deep points to ponder upon. Especially with respect to the station, the restorations, conservation, and his passing thoughts were that it is not. It is a place of anticipation. It is not a chicken factory. So with this thought, I will open the forum for questions, and I leave I leave it open for the questions from people. Since we have a small number of people, instead of in a webinar mode, we can have the questions.